So good evening, everyone. My name is Charlize Lewis, and I am the Executive Director of Louisville Literary Arts. And we are just so grateful that you decided to join us tonight for our December InKY reading. It is our last reading of 2022. So we have a special reading tonight. It is holiday themed, and we are so grateful that you all joined us. And before we begin, I just want everyone to know you are being recorded, and you can utilize the chat as much as you would like during the conversation. Also, we want our readers to put their information in their websites or their social media details. And if you have a word of encouragement, you can also put that in the chat as well. So tonight, we will begin our InKY with Charlotte Roth. All right. Charlotte has worked in fast food retail management, a yoga studio, and administrative positions. In her current life, she is a writer and a Chopra. Did I say that right?
Chopra.
I never get that right. A Chopra certified meditation instructor. Her most recent publication appears in Chicken Soup for the Soul, The Magic of Christmas. Charlotte resides in Louisville, Kentucky with her husband, 2 spoiled Havanese, and 98 houseplants. I don't know how you do that. But she loves to get back to the mountains when she can. She will put her information for Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all those connections in the chat after she completes her reading. So at this time, Charlotte, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you. It is such an honor to be here. And I am reading the piece that was in the Chicken Soup of the Soul tonight. And but I'm reading a longer version because Chicken Soup has to be a little smaller. And they tell me I need it to be a little longer for tonight. This piece is called The Passing of the Table. And here it is. My mother seemed fragile, like she had lost her strength for the first time in my life. I drove her the 45-minute drive over the wretched, curvy roads to this dreaded family gathering, the first since my Mama Kate's death. The 7 adult children gathered this humid August morning to distribute years of accumulated possessions from the tiny home of their beloved parents, my Mama and Papaw Sailor. Mama Kate lived only 30 days after my Papa's death. Nothing much of monetary value was in the home, but a wealth of the sentimental. The distribution should only take a few hours, but there were memories to relive and feathers to be ruffled. There were surprises. 7 Kennedy silver dollars, 7 handmade quilts, 1 pistol, and 1 tattered family Bible. Not a single of the 7 acknowledged the most oversized item in the tiny house. They walked around it like it wasn't there. The oval maple table with 8 chairs, shabby and well-worn, but the heart and soul of that home. Mama had been the cook, the chef, the goddess of the kitchen. You were welcome at her table anytime, day or night. Everyone was family. She fed you something if it was only a bologna sandwich, but most often she served you something decadent and sweet, like chocolate pie or apple stack cake. Her food was medicine. It could cure anything. I'll take it, my mother murmured. 6 heads swirled in unison, shining focus on my mother. 12 eyes staring with apprehension. Silence swallowed the room. Mom's face reddened and her eyes blinked rapidly as if someone were shaking the head of an old-fashioned doll. George asked, "You know what comes with it?" Mom said, "I do." She shook a menthol cool out of the pack and carefully placed the cigarette between her scarlet lips and lit it with a match, steadying the flame. She inhaled deeply, held the smoke in her lungs longer than usual, then exhaled the smoke in a slow, controlled stream. A habit I had come to recognize over the years as her, and so it is, ritual. Her mind was made up. She had just accepted the position as matriarch of the Sailor clan, and the torch had been passed. With the inheritance of the table, Mom welcomed the responsibility of hosting Thanksgiving and Christmas. No small feat. Mamaw had managed it effortlessly with ease, baking and prepping weeks before the dinner. My mother would cook for 30 or more people with no RSVPs. She knew they'd come. 10 months out of the year, 3 different states, 7 siblings and their families lived separate lives, but holidays were sacred times. They would all be together on Thanksgiving and Christmas, come hell or high water. 3 months later, on a cold Thanksgiving morning, I drove myself to Mom's in the wee hours to help. We chopped more celery and onion than any typical family might imagine, peeled potatoes for hours. At least it felt that way to me. Thank God for the Cuisinart, a luxury my grandmother didn't want. My mother was not concerned about a tidy house, nor did she fret about her attire or a preset table. Like her mother, the focus was on the food. The anxiety of recreating the food as delicious as Mamaw's caused Mom to bite her long polished fingernails to the quick. When the family devoured their overfilled plates, the meal should taste as it had in years past. The stakes were high, the cigarette smoke was thick in the kitchen, and one cigarette lit off the last red ember of the previous. The kitchen on 317 Catalpa Street was twice the size of the one on Sailor Road, but still a small kitchen. 317 had 2 full-sized refrigerators, the blessed Cuisinart, and a dishwasher. I pointed out things would be easier than at Mamaw's, attempting to reassure my mother. Oh, daggers shot from her eyes, penetrating deep into mine. She didn't have to say a word, and I didn't utter another. Stuffed celery was the first finished appetizer, and she nailed it. One family cluster at a time trickled in, tossing coats and scarves toward the coat rack. The loud conversations were as if nothing had changed. Typical sailor gossip, gigging, pitching in, mostly scrutinizing each dish. The macaroni salad needs more pickles, my Aunt Linda said. Then put them in it, Mom yelled. The door slammed. A bellowing baritone tune rang through the room. Over the river and through the woods. Where do you want these chocolate pies? My Uncle Doug asked. One by one, family members filled the house. The small white paneled kitchen was elbow to elbow with rowdy conversation, food debate, and cigarette smoke. The homemade dressing was the main conversation piece of the day and the most troublesome for Mom. Deep inside, she knew the dressing, not her hospitality, would make or break her debut as matriarch. The Sailor clan stood around the large stainless steel bowls, angling fingers into the raw dressing. It's dry, Pauline stated flatly. It needs more sage, SV piped in. Ooh, too much onion, declared someone with tiny fingers. Don't taste like Mommy's is what, mumbled my Aunt Phyllis. Aunt Phyllis always finished each sentence with is what. My brother Clinton was finishing up the deviled eggs when Mom roared, don't forget the paprika. And we all laughed at her pronunciation. It's paprika, Mom, Clinton responded. Mom said, whatever, just make them pretty. It was time to mash the potatoes. I could see Mom's exhaustion as she wiped the sweat from her brow. Reluctantly, I reached for the mixer. No lumps, Mom ordered. You'll never hear the end of it if you make lumpy mashed potatoes. I closed my eyes and channeled my inner Mamaw sailor, instinctively adding sticks of butter, free pouring whole milk, and salt as necessary. I encouraged finger dipping from time to time. I mashed over 10 pounds of potatoes without a single lump in the entire batch. Now, strangers peering through the bay window might witness a jubilant family, a festive Thanksgiving gathering full of joy and laughter, but a palpable undercurrent hung heavier than the cigarette smoke in that room. This Thanksgiving was difficult and different. We placed the food on the table via a chaotic assembly line. Macaroni salad, pink jello salad, 7-layer salad, sweet potato casserole, broccoli casserole, shuck beans, mashed potatoes, peas, giblet gravy, and baskets of dinner rolls, to name a few. Many dishes on the beloved table with platters of dressing at each end. We all scrambled for seats, crowded around, waiting for the turkey. It took 2 men to hoist it out of the oven and onto the platter. They set the oversized golden bird onto the table. Mom settled at the head. Everyone started to fill their plates, shambolic as always. No, pass the potatoes, please, with this bunch. Everyone talked over everybody else. It was a free-for-all, reaching for this or that, and I might have grabbed a roll from someone else's plate. Then I heard a creak. Without warning, the table started giving way from the middle, collapsing in slow motion. The commotion of the clan came to a halt. A quiet stillness covered the room. All the food began to slide to the center in a large heap, and my heart skipped a beat. "Oh God," someone whispered. I can still see Uncle George's lanky body slithering out of his chair, sliding beneath the table, scuttling to upright the center. Dishes slide like pinballs, bouncing off each other. A bowl of cranberry sauce teetered toward the floor. The gravy bounced off my potato bowl. The turkey platter tried to stay centered. Mom's eyes wide, hand covering her mouth. The collective energy, shock, and disbelief kept us from uttering a sound until Aunt Pauline, trying to suppress her ear-splitting giggle cackle, let it loose. Pauline's burst of laughter became contagious. The family symphony of laughter and tears began to play, releasing us from our frozen shock. Eager hands started scrambling to rescue dishes. Synchronized tears and laughter filled the room. Food scooted this way and that. The pandemonium escalated, the snorts, snot, and snickers. The table was falling apart. "Hurry up, I can't just sit here while y'all eat," George yelled. "Well, why not?" Pauline giggled back. My dog Tinker frenetically cleaned up food falling on the floor, causing more chaos. At last, the serving bowls were relocated to the stove and kitchen counters. Some of us ate standing, others sat in chairs around the broken table with plates in our laps. Some carried dishes to the living room and den. The Saylor families were scattered throughout my childhood home, and it felt right. Just like Thanksgiving in Mama's tiny house. It was assumed the table collapsed from the overload of heavy dishes. I believe the table collapsed from the weight of the heavy hearts in the room. The hysterical laughter siphoned tears the Saylors had been too stubborn to shed. The family gathered around the reinforced table each holiday, reminiscing about the first Thanksgiving without their parents, the irony of the table collapsing, and the possibility that Mama may have orchestrated the whole thing. She knew exactly how to use her food and her table to unite her brood. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte, so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody have any feedback for Charlotte?
It was excellent.
That was really good. It made my, yes, I love that. I'm a geriatrician, so it made me cry. I love
It was wonderful, Charlotte.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Very good. Very good, Charlotte.
Such a good reading. You did well.
Thank you, Kim.
So I do want to tell you Charlotte's contact information on social media is Instagram at CRoth502 or Twitter at CRoth502 and at Charlotte Bowling Roth on Facebook.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlotte.
Yay.
So our next readers are a father-daughter duo. All right, so we have Carrie Furman and Dean Furman with us tonight. And Carrie, after graduating from the University of Miami in May of 2022, she worked as the Louisville field coordinator for the Charles Booker Senate campaign. Unfortunately, her job ended on election day. But in May, she will begin a 2-year commitment to AmeriCorps Teach for America program, teaching in Nashville, Tennessee. And Dean. Dean is a former president of the illustrious Louisville Literary Arts. He is an attorney with Furman, Nielsen, and Euler PLLC in Louisville, practicing commercial litigation, personal injury, healthcare, and whistleblower law. On his personal time, he also writes fiction, which, contrary to some popular beliefs, is not part of the legal profession. That one's good. That was good. And I also want to say publicly, thank you, Dean, for hosting our VIP reception for the Writer's Block. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Glad to-
So you all have the floor.
Thank you. We are going to do 2 pieces for you tonight. The second one is I think the reason why we were invited. It's called A Kentucky Night Before Christmas. It's a gentle parody of the classic 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. Carrie will be reading that. And then we were asked to do another piece. And so we wrote I wrote a short story a few days ago. And so we'll give it a whirl here. It's a Christmas story. The title is An Investigation into the Inscrutable Mr. Gingleboots, the Elf. And this is how it begins. Investigate Mr. Gingleboots. That's what I was told to do. For those who may not know, that's Mr. Gingleboots, chief elf toy maker to the man, of course, being Santa Claus. So I did it. It didn't end exactly how I imagined, but it started precisely how I envisioned it. How do I know? Because I have a memory function and it tells me I'm remembering it correctly. If this were a book like Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, I might start by drawing a picture of me at the beginning. Because this isn't a book with drawings, I'll describe the beginning of me instead. I started like most every other elf with a divided personality. Then the egg and the sperm cells merged into one. That cell didn't last, and soon it split, dividing into 2 cells, then 4, then 8, and then advanced math. I won't bore you with the calculations. Suffice it to say that my body had a lot of cells dividing before I knew even what math was. More important than math, since I was never good at it, was listening and learning about people. Growing up in the North Pole, my grandmother told me not to let my imagination get away from me. She taught me empathy by telling me to walk in someone else's slippers to understand them. But what could I do? I was a kid. I didn't understand. My feet were too small to fit properly in most elves' pointy-toed shoes anyway. Besides, they probably smelled. Mine did. My investigation of Mr. Gingleboots, chief elf toy maker, started when the elf high inquisitor called me into her office. I didn't think it was a big deal since I was her only employee. Yes, the North Pole has an investigation office. Most people know we have a dentist thanks to that old documentary film about Rudolph, and they shouldn't be surprised we have professions other than toy making. The elf high inquisitor, or E-High, as I like to call her when she couldn't hear me, also doubled as the North Pole's only lawyer. She didn't have a law degree, but we own a complete DVD set of Law and Order and can access basic cable. Don't be surprised, it can be pretty boring here during the 6 months the sun doesn't shine. Well, my mission started because Santa was concerned about missing toys, which squarely fell under Mr. Gingleboots' purview. Preliminary surveillance showed Mr. Gingleboots leaving the toy factory each day with a full backpack and disappearing to the North Pole past our Christmas village. Who would do such a thing? It's not like our slippers are made for walking, let alone for outrunning all those hungry polar bears migrating from the south. None of my fellow elves knew I worked for E-High. This way I could make inquiries at the other elf trade shops without raising suspicion. We created a cover story by my working in the Office of Temporary Needs, where I could be purposefully assigned to any place for a short time, like Hermes Dental Practice, the Central Bakery, or some kid's shelf. For this investigation, I was assigned to the Big Show, Toy Central's offices where we managed Santa's workshop. I don't know why we still called it this, because Santa hardly ever visited, let alone pick up a tool to make a toy. I heard he just watches television most days and complains about elves moving in from the South Pole. Well, we needed the holiday help, and where else would we find qualified elves? In any event, I infiltrated Toy Central by filling in for Mr. Gingleboot's administrative assistant, who unfortunately came down with a cracked tooth after visiting the dentist. On my first day, I finally met Santa's chief toy maker, Mr. Gingleboots. Although he wore a bespoke red fur coat, perhaps baby seal like Santa's coat, his face painted a different picture from Santa's rosy cheeks. Instead, here sat a frowning and pale, middle-aged elf with short-cropped black hair in this little windowless office. No sun shone in. It couldn't. That's what windowless means. At first, I didn't think Mr. Gingleboots was a vampire. I don't make rash judgments of other elves. I arrived at no conclusions upon meeting him. Yet, I knew I'd never seen this whitewashed elf basking in the summer sun with the rest of us. I started weighing the evidence as any good investigator would do. I didn't own a stake, so no immediate means existed to prove my theory one way or the other. Maybe I overreacted, but no one proved me wrong when I assumed people weren't the undead. Logic meant the assumption worked as well in the opposite direction. As I pondered this mystery on my first day at Toy Central, my brain churned with ways I could prove my theory about this pale elf without a stake, a clove of garlic, or a vial of holy water, which were all the things missing from my candy-striped satchel. Those hours and hours of watching basic cable were paying off as I studied Mr. Gingleboot's office. He had no computer. In fact, his desk sat empty except for a lone notepad, no photo frames, no whimsical kitsch art on the desk, no tape dispenser, or even a stapler. I knew vampires couldn't see themselves in a mirror, but could photos not be taken of them either? I didn't remember this detail in the classic vampire movies. Besides, Dracula worked at a castle, not a modeling agency, so why would vampires like photos? However, if Dracula had been a true office worker, we'd probably see miniature coffin toys, a Renfield action figure, and at least photos of his pet bats all over his work area. Based on the lack of anything similar on this elf's desk, maybe Mr. Gingleboots wasn't a vampire after all. But wait, I said to myself. Wait for what? Yelled out Mr. Gingleboots from his office. Whoops. I ignored him, believing I found an important clue in this missing stapler. A vampire wouldn't tolerate a device like a stapler on his desk. It's a two-pronged metal stake, an object of terror for paper and little fingers. The stapler's absence was telling. He also had slippers much nicer than I've ever seen, more similar to Santa's boots than the delicate felt footies they gave us. No doubt another difference between elves like me and elves who are members of the army of the unliving. At the end of the day, I waited for Mr. Gingleboots to leave. I hadn't seen him go, but I was busy with important things at my desk, like clipping my toenails. When I assumed he left, I asserted myself and went to the windowless office. Someone left the office door open, but switched off the lights. Was this pallid bureaucrat gone? Possibly, but lights off mirrored the condition a vampire preferred. Without stepping into the office, I slowly leaned my head in, my right hand nonchalantly covering my neck. I peeked to the part of the office I couldn't see from the outside. A stand-up coffin. No, wait, it's only a storage cabinet. No sign of him or the lone notepad previously on his desk. Maybe he preferred a clean desk rather than being a walking undead bloodsucker. This stood as a possibility, probably even of equal weight with my original theory. I could test this alternative hypothesis too, which the empirical half of my brain told my imaginative half to do. Actually, my empirical half talked a lot, and in this situation, even more so. It almost convinced me to forget about my vampire theory and focus on the missing toys, or Mr. Gingleboots' mysterious daily walks. I did have piles of toy inventory forms on his assistant's desk I could peruse, or I could access files on the assistant's computer in a folder marked "Don't Review for Mr. Gingleboots' Eyes Only." I could even follow him one day when he announced he's going for a walk. Perhaps I try these investigative avenues, but first, I wanted to do something productive with my time and figure out this whole vampire thing that cropped out of nowhere. So the next day I arrived early, only to find Mr. Gingleboots walking a few steps behind me. Was he stalking me? No, he worked at the same office as me. Then it happened. This was the time of year when we enjoyed 3 hours of daylight each day before true winter arrived. He walked through a shaft of sunlight. I waited for the mayhem, but alas, no bursting into flames, no skin boiling off, and no pale elf turning into a mush of gooey blood and connective tissue at the entrance to Toy Central. No, he wasn't a vampire. Despite my flights of fancy, I really didn't think he was a fanged, pointy-eared harbinger of death. I'm grounded in reality, as my empirical brain tells me all the time. Besides, I didn't think vampires likely lived at the North Pole. It's not cool enough, at least for them. After the lack of burning the sunlight, Mr. Gingleboots walked right past me. He didn't say hi, didn't acknowledge me with a head shake or an eyebrow raise or even a wink. Why not? I showered that morning, probably. He didn't stop at the elevator, but went straight for the stairs. I went to the office and he appeared 15 minutes later with a rather large and full backpack. He then left for his walk after lunch with his full backpack. About an hour later, he returned with no backpack. This happened for a week straight. The signs were there that this was kind of suspicious. These signs were not big, red and octagon, but present if you thought enough about them with a few glasses of eggnog. I needed to find where the missing toys were and if Mr. Gingleboots had any part in this nefarious scheme. Santa depended on me. During one of these walks, as I stared at the unopened, for Mr. Gingleboots' eyes only folder on the computer, but what to my wondering eyes should appear? But Mrs. Claus herself. Good afternoon. Are you new? Mrs. Claus asked me. No, I was born quite a bit ago, I answered. Okay, then, she said with one of her wide smiles I'll often see her use on Santa. Is Mr. Gingleboots in? In what? Mrs. Claus looked around like she was lost as a baby seal at a club party. In his office, perhaps? No, Mrs. Claus, he's out on his daily walk. Splendid. I'll catch him at his destination. She walked away, but turned as if to say something to me, but shook her head, winked at me, and left instead. Aha, I said to myself, this time only in my brain. If Mrs. Claus knew where Mr. Gingleboots went, then she may have conspired on the crime. Wow, I couldn't imagine someone as swell as Mrs. Claus stealing toys. But I knew as an investigator, I needed to keep every option open until closed. I made my decision that night as I slept nestled in my bearskin bed. I would follow Mr. Gingleboots the next day. I could only learn so much from sitting at my desk. Osmosis sounds good in theory, but I wasn't going to absorb Mr. Gingleboots' plan just by sitting outside his office every day and keeping my hand on his assistant's computer. Besides, osmosis doesn't work in the real world unless you have plenty of water, which we don't have in the North Pole because of all the ice around us. Well, Mr. Gingleboots' walks always occurred after lunch, so I decided to invite one of his longtime colleagues to eat with me to see if she knew anything before I followed him. Let's call her Miss Longtime Colleague because I don't really remember her name. For lunch, food was the typical North Pole ice-to-table fare. Some narwhal tenders with a side of algae fries as the main dish. I indulged and ordered my snow cone dessert with the extra blubber topping. Once Ms. Longtime Colleague and I picked a table away from the other elves, I started my inquiries with a subtle question. So, noticed anything strange about Mr. Gingleboots lately?
Strange? What do you mean?
Is he a werewolf?
Did you just say werewolf?
Yeah, that would be strange, wouldn't it?
I've got to go.
Sometimes you strike out. Me at least had another opportunity when Mr. Gingleboots left the office. I followed him, and although it was pitch black, I was able to see his marvelous shoe imprints in the fresh snow as he trudged along. Closer to the village, other tracks intersected, but I could always follow his because they sank deeper in the snow. It might have been the fancy boot-like slippers or that full backpack he carried. But if we're honest, Mr. Gingleboots might have considered losing a few pounds as well. After what seemed like an eternity of following these tracks, a light glowed up ahead. At first, I assumed it was one of Rudolph's lost cousins. As I ventured closer, the light was connected to a building with a large landing strip next to it. I snuck around the building's closed door and looked for a window to peek inside. Even though windows are invisible, I was able to find one. I peered in and solved the crime. Shelves and shelves of toys, and there stood Mr. Gingleboots, taking more toys from his backpack and stacking them with all the other pilfered goods. Boy, will Santa be proud of me. I plan on marching right in and putting Mr. Gingleboots under arrest until the polar bear's claw hit me so hard I thought I saw sugar plum fairies. So intent on watching the crime scene, I hadn't heard the bear approach me. Landing 10 feet from the building, I saw the bear in the light, standing on his hind legs like a white furred werewolf. He let out a howl and started to bear down on me. It was over. The investigation wouldn't end like I wanted. They'd find me dead, or maybe not at all, just some smelly slippers and a few upchucked jingle bell buttons from where the bear ate me. Boy, Santa will be disappointed, and Mr. Gingleboots will have gotten away with it. Bang! My ears burned as the shot deafened me, but I saw Mrs. Claus from the corner of my eye. Because loud noises don't affect your vision. Slumped over on its side, the polar bear no longer charged at me, but Mrs. Claus came running. Her lips were moving, but I couldn't hear anything. I tried to read her lips, but there were no letters on them. I looked down and saw 4 claw marks torn through my coat, and through these cuts, only red. I couldn't breathe and felt faint. Managed to look up again. Mr. Gingleboots ran from the building in my direction. Were they going to finish me off, I wondered, as I slipped into the darkness of unconsciousness. Wake up, dearie. I smelled hot chocolate and felt a soft hand underneath my head. Oh my, where is my elf cap? Did I lose it? Or did Mr. Gingleboots steal it and add it to a stash of ill-gotten goods? I opened my eyes to see Mrs. Claus holding the biggest mug of hot chocolate I'd ever imagined. Behind her walked Mr. Gingleboots, pacing the floor. Mr. G, Mrs. Claus said, he's coming around. Thank the North Star, Mr. Gingleboots said, bolting over to stand next to Mrs. Claus as he put his hand on my shoulder. Don't worry, you're here in my guest room, Mrs. Claus said. You're going to be just fine. Have some of my homemade hot chocolate from Santa's own cup. But, I stuttered, not knowing if that sweet-smelling elixir concealed some deadly poison or just Santa's germs. If they wanted me dead, the polar bear would have been the perfect opportunity. Maybe I'm dying now. I couldn't keep my words inside of me and muttered, those claws, all that blood I lost. Mrs. Claus laughed. All that red you saw through your torn coat? Silly, that was your red shirt. You just got the wind knocked out of you when the bear threw you. You probably hit your head on the ice and snow too. You saved me then, shot the bear? Mrs. Claus exchanged glances with Mr. Gingleboots before answering my questions. I tranquilized the bear with my dart gun. I always keep it outside the village. Never know when you might run into danger these days. The bear is perfectly fine now. But I heard a bang. Don't tranquilizer dart guns go swoosh instead of bang? Mrs. Claus smiled and shook her head. Don't believe everything you see on television. The bear is right where he needs to be. I took the mug but hesitated to drink it. Mr. Gingleboots came closer, and a bed of rosiness appeared on his pale cheeks. Was I wrong? Was he really a vampire and drank that polar bear's blood, giving his complexion a newfound ruddiness? Mr. Chucklecoat, Mr. Gingleboots began, using my alias. or should I say, investigator Mr. Chuckle Jacket. Oh no, they discovered my true name. I swallowed hard. No need to worry, Mrs. Claus interrupted. I knew Santa had voiced his concerns to the Elf High Inquisitor. She's a dear friend, and she told me who she sent to investigate. I thought about telling you when I came to Mr. G's office, but you were too good at playing dumb for me to ruin your cover. I didn't want to brag to Mrs. Claus, but playing dumb came pretty easy for me. Then you helped Mr. G, Chief toy maker, Mr. Gingleboots steal all those toys? Steal? How can you steal something we make to give away? Then why did you hide those toys far from the workshop? Mrs. Claus looked at me. You know, not all the children in the world celebrate Christmas. Why should they be denied gifts at the end of the year because they were born in families believing something different than we do? We decided to allocate some of our toys to give away to all the other children in the world. In fact, it's way overdue. But why doesn't Santa know about it? Mrs. Claus closed her eyes and shook her head again. It all started when we ordered that satellite dish. Let's just say Santa watches too much of one particular cable news channel for him to understand what we're doing. I can only hear so much about replacement theory and other conspiracies. I'll tell him eventually when he returns to his senses, but we need to have a test run this year. But why do you haul the toys out there on foot, Chief Toymaker? We elves don't believe in hiking when there's a perfectly good sleigh and reindeer around. Mr. Gingleboots blushed and leaned into me. I reflexively covered my neck. He puckered his lips, hesitated, and said, don't tell anyone, but my cholesterol is too high. Doc recommended cutting down on the fats and start exercising. Well, I can do at least one of them. I felt relieved. Vampires don't eat fat. I sipped what was the best hot chocolate of my life and reported the High Elf Inquisitor the next day. I found the missing toys were a result of higher quality inspections, removing toys failing to meet the new standards. She agreed, as if she already knew the answer. If I'd read the inventory reports at Toy Central, I could have figured out the cover story a bit faster myself and without ruining my best polar bear fur coat. Fortunately, Mrs. Claus presented me with a new fur coat a few days later after I returned to the office to temporary needs. And to my surprise, Mr. Gingleboots gifted me a pair of shoes that looked just like his. Waiting for my next assignment, I thought back to what my grandmother had taught me. You do need to walk in another's slippers to truly understand them. After taking Mr. G's slippers, I finally understood this and him, even if they were a wee too small, and let's be honest again, too stinky for me. The end. And then we have Carrie Furman with a Kentucky Night Before Christmas.
All right. 'Twas night before Christmas when all through the hollers, not a thing was stirring, not even recruit dollars. The horseshoes were hung by the stalls with care, in hopes that old coach would soon be there. The young'uns were nestled all snug in the hay, while visions of basketballs bounced where they lay. And Mama and her pom-poms and I in my coonskin had just settled down for a nip of warm bourbon. When out on the coal mine there arose such a dust storm, I sprang from the bar just to grab my claim form. Away to the window I flew like a wildcat, tore open the curtains and yelled, "What's that?" The moon on the gash of the newly stripped mine gave a luster like an inspector about ready to fine, when what to my bloodshot eyes should appear but a flying bench and 8 sweaty players. With a mean, wizened driver, so hollering and cursing, I knew in a moment it must be old Coach Burson. More rapid than fast breaks his athletes they pressed, and he whistled and signaled, and their names he hissed. Now Ford, now Davis, now Farmer and Wall, on Rondo, on Mashburn, on Walker and Hall, to the top of the loft, to the top of the stall, now dribble away past, dribble away all. Like dumb refs who let the bad calls fly, when they meet with an argument, look to the sky. So up to the barn top, the players they flew, with a bench full of toys and old Coach too. And then like a bubbling still I heard up on tops, the pounding and bustling of each player's hops. As I spit on my hand and was praising the Lord, down the grain chute old coach slid, nary a word. He was dressed in a fancy suit from his head to his suede shoes, and his clothes were all varnished with hairspray and booze. A bundle of knickknacks he'd flung on his back, and he smiled real quick like he'd won at the track. His eyes, how they stared, his brow became furrowed. His cheeks were all puffy, his nose almost burrowed. Spittin' and shoutin', his mouth stood agape. He held himself heroically, only needing a cape. The clump of chewing tobacco he held tight in his teeth, and the juice encircled his chin like a wreath. He had a stern face and a pointing finger. He jabbed and jerked when he gestured like a gospel singer. He was trim and upright, uptight, a self-important sort, and I chuckled when I spied him out of his court. A glare of his gaze and a nod of his mane soon made me think he might not be sane. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his board and drew up some plays, then turned to guard forward. And putting his finger straight up his nose, the players passed the gifts with a perfect pose. Old coach turned back to his bench, to his team gave wink, and up they jumped, no player a weak link. As they dribbled out, I heard him exclaim, "Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good game." Yay.
Yay, it was awesome, awesome. Thank you all so much. Dean, did you see where I put vampires don't eat fat?
Yes, yes, exactly.
Thank you all so much for reading.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I really have, I've often thought it would be a nice thing to be in Dean's brain.
Yeah, me
Like,
too.
yeah,
I've
oh,
also
what's
thought
what's
that
it
way.
like in there? I'm so creative with that political slant. Yes. Fun. Thank
Well, I do want to recognize Kim Crum, who's on our advisory board. Hey, Kim.
Hi.
Irv Klein, president of the board. And Yvonne Lovell, who is our board member as well. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. So I always have to do, the whole spiel of if you want to become a member of Louisville Literary Arts or donate to the organization, you can go to www.louisvilleliteraryarts.org, and all those links are in there. Like I said before, this is our last InKY for 2022. We got through it, we made it, and I will be putting out on our website all the people they're going to read between January and May. We are off in the summers. So if anybody else on here wants to read, make sure to go fill out our form on the website. I just want to thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Dean. And Carrie, good luck in your new assignment that's coming up.
Thank you.
And you travel safely. You're coming back to Louisville soon, right?
You are.
Yes.
Thank you, Charlize, too. Appreciate it.
Yes. And Charlotte, we want to hear more from you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. You
Yes,
will.
yes. So thank you all for joining us tonight, and hopefully we'll see you in January. Have a good evening.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.